Switzerland's Neue Zeitung reported that on October 1st, a 23-year-old Chinese man attacked children from a daycare on the streets of Zurich. A staff member was escorting several children to the daycare at the time. The attack left the three 5-year-old children injured, with one boy suffering severe wounds. Fortunately, he is out of critical condition. The attacker, Fan Yuhao, graduated in June last year from the School of Foreign Languages at the Southwest University in Chongqing, China, where he studied English. He is now pursuing a master's degree in computer science at the University of Zurich. Before the incident, he posted a puzzling message on Instagram, referencing sexual fantasies and celebrating the 75th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, which has left many baffled. Hi, welcome to Dig Into China. I'm Dong Shang. In this episode, we'll discuss the recent surge of extreme nationalist fanatics. The attack in Switzerland isn't the first of its kind this year. On June 11, there was a stabbing of 4 American teachers in Jilin. On June 24th, a Japanese school bus was targeted in Suzhou. On August 27, a Chinese student in Australia threw coffee at a baby. On September 18, a Japanese student was killed in Shenzhen. In just 3 months, there have been 5 attacks on foreigners, 4 of them involving children. After the first incident, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs could still call it an isolated case. But when 5 such incidents happened in 3 months, calling it isolated seemed to completely redefine the word. These widespread attacks on foreigners are reminiscent of the Boxer Rebellion during the late Qing dynasty. So why are we seeing a rise in extreme nationalist individuals recently? If we only focus on attackers, the explanation seems fairly straightforward. A mix of extreme patriotism fueling xenophobia and personal frustrations in life. The frustration with life is evident among these attackers, as all 3 from the mainland were middle-aged and unemployed. Government reports identified the assailant in Jilin as a 55-year-old Cui Da-peng, an unemployed man, while the attacker in Suzhou was 52-year-old Zhou, another local unemployed man. In Shenzhen, the attacker was 44-year-old Shen, who was also unemployed at the time. Media reports from Shenzhen revealed that Shen had a previous criminal record and had been arrested before. It appears that middle-aged unemployment is a shared characteristic among these attackers. On the other hand, extreme nationalism is also clearly reflected in these individuals. For example, the attacker in Shenzhen carried out the assault on September 18, a date of great historical significance for China, often called the September 18 Incident Memorial Day or National Humiliation Day. On this day in 1931, Japan's Kwantung Army orchestrated the September 18 incident, also known as the Mukdong Incident, in northeastern China, marking the start of Japan's full-scale invasion of the country. Regarding the attacker in Switzerland mentioned earlier, a review of his Instagram reveals that he had previously questioned why his university was holding lectures with Taiwan. It seems that extreme patriotism coupled with personal frustration acted as the trigger for these violent acts. Following this line of reasoning, it's easy to attribute everything to the Chinese Communist Party. The struggling economy is due to the CCP and the surge of nationalist fanatics. Where does that come from? Clearly, it's also something the CCP has cultivated. Is this reasoning correct? Yes, it's definitely valid to a certain extent. I've discussed the economic issues many times before, so I won't go over them again. However, the surge in extreme anti-Japanese and anti-American sentiment in China in recent years clearly has the CCP's influence behind it. For instance, there are countless false rumors about Japan circulating online. One popular example is the so-called Japan Replacement Plan, which claims that Japan is building schools in China to train spies who will, after graduation, infiltrate China's leadership in order to achieve Japan's goal of colonizing the country. It's difficult to argue that the attackers targeting Japanese schools weren't influenced by these rumors. While the CCP may not have originated these false claims, it's clear that they are allowing them to flourish. If the CCP wanted to put a stop to such rumors, they could easily do so. But it's apparent that they are not willing to take that step. With the CCP's tacit approval, the internet has become a breeding ground for all sorts of strange nationalist content, including numerous videos filled with anti-Japanese slurs. That said, I think it's overly simplistic to place all the blame on the CCP. We should consider the issue from a broader perspective. The rise of these extreme nationalists can be viewed as a reflection of the collective emotional response of the Chinese people. How can we interpret this emotional response? The current situation in China closely resembles the Boxer Rebellion during the Qing dynasty. Today's extreme nationalists are not too different from the Boxers of that time. However, in our analysis, we often overlook the larger historical context surrounding the Boxer Rebellion and the shifts in national sentiment. Today's big background is reminiscent of the Boxer movement. So let's first trace the development of the Qing dynasty in its final decades and analyze the changes in the mindset of the Chinese people during that period. Beginning in 1840, China gradually opened its doors to the outside world as a result of the two Opium Wars. The Qing dynasty came to realize the significant gap between itself and the foreign nations, acknowledging that China was no longer the celestial empire and needed to learn from others, even if it meant sacrificing some national pride. This readiness to learn and to set aside dignity was reflected in the Yang Wu Yundong, or self-strengthening movement, which started in 1861. This movement aimed to modernize China's military and industry by adopting advanced Western technologies and methods while still adhering to traditional Confucian values. The goal was to establish a system of Chinese essence, Western application for enhancing productivity and strengthening the nation. Although we now understand that the concept of Chinese essence Western application has its shortcomings, it is still an improvement over a purely traditional Chinese approach. This strategy did facilitate some development. However, the progress made over the decades fostered a false sense of confidence among the leadership and the people of the Qing dynasty. They began to believe they were on the verge of taking off as a world power. While they had not yet reached global dominance, it at least gave the Qing dynasty the impression that they could engage with other nations on more equal terms. It can be hard for us to understand this inflated sense of confidence today. We often view the Qing dynasty, particularly Empress Dowager Cixi, as foolish for daring to challenge the Japanese, the British, or the Eight-Nation Alliance. However, if we look at some data from that era, it becomes clearer why the Qing government held such beliefs. For example, when examined GDP, differences in statistical methods can yield varying conclusions. Some contend that from 1840 to 1895, the Qing dynasty maintained the largest GDP in the world, while others argue that the United States surpassed it as early as 1890. Nonetheless, it is evident that the Qing dynasty's GDP ranked among the top two globally during that time. Moreover, during that period, the Beiyang fleet was considered the 8th largest naval force in the world and the largest in Asia. Additionally, the context of 1890 was different from today. World War I had yet to take place, and the population size remained a crucial factor in determining the outcomes of wars. Japan had a population of just under 40 million, while the United States had about 62 million, whereas the Qing dynasty had an impressive population of around 300 million. It can be challenging for us today to comprehend why the Qing dynasty felt confident enough to confront Western powers or engage in the First Sino-Japanese War. However, when we examine the data, it becomes apparent that on paper, the Qing dynasty was significantly stronger than Japan and many Western nations. If one overlooks the idea that institutional differences play a critical role in determining war outcomes, and the focus is solely on superficial strength, the Qing dynasty appeared quite powerful. This overconfidence ultimately led to severe repercussions. In the 1895 First Sino-Japanese War, the Qing dynasty faced a devastating defeat, which stripped away its facade of strength and thoroughly discredited the Chinese essence, Western practicality philosophy of the self-strengthening movement. Looking back at this period in history, it seems logical that after experiencing such a significant defeat, the appropriate response would have been to abandon the Chinese essence, Western practicality approach and fully adopt the Western method. At the very least, one would expect a renewed effort to strengthening the self-strengthening movement. However, the reality was quite the opposite. Within the upper ranks of the Qing government, the failure of the self-strengthening movement resulted in the expansion of conservative power, effectively bringing the movement to a standstill. Meanwhile, among the general public, rather than acknowledging the disparities between China and the Western powers, as well as Japan, a sense of overconfidence emerged. Many people believed that the Qing could triumph over these foreign nations at any time. At that time, many of those involved in the Boxer Rebellion believed that practicing mystical powers could enable them to withstand the foreign guns and artillery. Across the Qing dynasty, from the government to the general public, there was a strong reluctance to acknowledge the consequences of their defeat. Rather than leading to introspection, this loss fueled a sense of arrogance. Instead of reflecting on the reasons behind their failure, anger toward foreign powers took root, representing a significant shift in national sentiment before the Boxer Rebellion erupted. Rather than recognizing their shortcomings, there was a collective emotional response akin to wounded pride, manifesting as defiance against the setbacks they faced. Examining the past few decades reveals a striking resemblance to the trajectory of the Qing dynasty. If we regard the reform and opening up that began in 1979 as a modern iteration of the self-strengthening movement, it has undoubtedly led to notable economic growth in China. This growth has fueled an inflated sense of confidence, empowering China to engage more assertively with the United States and the global community. Since the trade war between the US and China began in 2018, China's share of the US GDP has continuously declined, signaling a clear loss in this conflict. This defeat is reminiscent of the loss in the First Sino-Japanese War. Following this setback, a similar stress reaction was emerged. At the central level, there has been a lack of reflection on the limitations of the new Chinese-style self-strengthening movement or the reform and opening up policies. Instead of considering the need for political reform alongside economic adjustments, the government has retreated from Western practices, moving further toward a conservative approach. Moreover, a tendency to deny personal failures has emerged among the public. Despite the widespread feeling that job opportunities are dwindling, consumption is falling, and overall living conditions are worsening, anyone who dares to voice these concerns openly often faces mockery from others. Conversely, while many are reluctant to admit that China is facing failures, there is a continuous effort to find scapegoats, often blaming China's current challenges on the US and the Western nations' blockades. This collective sentiment reflects a widespread emotional reaction to perceived failures in response to the disillusionment of a grand national vision. Ultimately, this reaction echoes the emergence of the Boxer Rebellion during the late Qing dynasty. Therefore, I do not believe that the rise of extreme nationalism in today's China is merely a result of the Chinese Communist Party trying to deflect blame, as this perspective tends to overestimate the capabilities of the party's leadership. While we cannot definitively know the true thoughts of the party's upper echelons, a review of the history of Empress Dowager Cixi reveals that she did not recognize her shortcomings after defeat in the First Sino-Japanese War. Instead, 5 years later, Xi declared war on all Western powers. Xi's decision-making seems utterly baffling from a rational standpoint. How could she have the audacity to declare war on all nations just 5 years after being defeated by Japan? It's clear that she was in a state of reactive response at that time. I believe Xi Jinping and the Communist Party leadership are also experiencing a state of reactive response. It's easy to assume that high-ranking officials are purely rational beings, but we shouldn't overlook the fact that they may not be completely level-headed due to their positions. While promoting anti-Japanese and anti-American sentiments can certainly help divert social tensions, a more significant issue might be that the leadership has lost its sense of reason and entered a reactive state. This has led them to adopt extreme views against Japan and the US without recognizing that the underlying causes of their failures are rooted in the system itself. They might even be oblivious to their own shortcomings. Times have indeed changed. With advancements in global technology and economic development, the intensity of conflicts between nations has significantly diminished. Previously, direct military confrontations involving firearms were common. Now, we primarily engage in trade wars. As a result, this modern iteration of the Boxer movement is unlikely to manifest as a nationwide grassroots armed organization targeting foreigners. Instead, we might see more extreme individuals resorting to direct attacks on foreigners. Furthermore, foreign nations will not respond as they did in the past, when they would form coalitions like the 8-Nation Alliance to protect their citizens. As incidents escalate, Western countries will continue to hold the Communist Party accountable. If the CCP remains unresponsive and continues to foster nationalism, it could lead to an exodus of foreign investments and companies from China, further exacerbating the country's economic decline. The current situation, where China seems collectively caught in a stress response, may appear disheartening and reminiscent of past mistakes. However, there is an optimistic viewpoint to consider. When we examine the history of the Qing dynasty, we find that such stress responses typically do not endure for long. The hostility toward Japan and the West arising from this reaction is fundamentally illogical. It fails to tackle the underlying issue, the systemic problems within the country. Consequently, these reactions are unlikely to resolve China's economic issues. Instead, they may further harm the economy, increase social pressure, and lead China into a deeper crisis. When a major failure occurs, China will inevitably come to realize its problems at all levels. It will recognize that the issues cannot be addressed merely through a blend of Western practice or through anti-foreign sentiments and scapegoating perceived adversaries. In the end, in the face of significant failure, society will pinpoint the fundamental problems, directing attention to the political system itself. This reflects the change in public sentiment in the Qing dynasty after the failure of the Boxer Rebellion. In the aftermath of the rebellion's defeat and the invasion by the 8-Nation Alliance, the anti-foreign sentiment evolved into resentment against the Manchu rulers and the Qing government. Likewise, in present-day China, it's probable that the dissatisfaction towards foreigners will soon shift towards frustration with communist officials. Incidents of violence against foreigners may turn into actions aimed at Communist Party officials. However, it remains uncertain how long this transformation will take. Thank you so much for watching. If you find this video helpful, please like it, drop a comment below, and hit the subscribe button right here. It really helps YouTube suggest my video to others. I'll be back with more content soon. Until then, stay well.